What if I told you that the greatest engine battle in muscle car history was fought entirely in the shadows? I'm talking about the Chevy 383 Stroker versus the Ford 390 FE, engines that waged a secret war that most people never even knew existed. One was an underground creation that manufacturers pretended didn't exist, while the other was deliberately hidden from the public to avoid destroying an entire corporate image. Today, I'm going to expose the most covert automotive conspiracy ever conceived and reveal why these engines were considered too dangerous for mainstream America to discover. Imagine the mid-1960s, and while everyone's attention was focused on the obvious muscle car battles happening in showrooms, the real war was being fought in back-alley speed shops and corporate skunk works programs. This wasn't about advertising campaigns or dealership displays. This was about pure, unfiltered performance that existed outside the normal rules of automotive commerce. The Chevy 383 Stroker wasn't even supposed to exist according to General Motors' corporate policy, but underground engineers had discovered that by combining a 350 small block with a 400 crankshaft, they could create displacement that delivered big block performance in a small block package. This wasn't official factory production. This was automotive alchemy happening in secret facilities that GM pretended to know nothing about. Meanwhile, Ford's 390 FE was being deliberately suppressed by corporate executives who were terrified that its true capabilities would overshadow their flagship big block programs. The FE family was producing power numbers that embarrassed Ford's own marketing department, so they made a calculated decision to hide this engine's potential, rather than let it cannibalize sales of their more expensive power plants. But here's the conspiracy that nobody talks about. Both engines represented threats to the established order that went far beyond simple corporate competition. The 383 proved that hot rodders could build engines that surpassed anything Detroit was willing to sell, while the 390 demonstrated that Ford was deliberately holding back technology that could have dominated the entire muscle car market. These engines weren't just performance alternatives, they were proof that the manufacturers were lying about what was really possible. Let me destroy everything you thought you knew about displacement limits with the underground specifications that changed automotive history forever. The Chevy 383 Stroker was never officially rated by General Motors because it wasn't supposed to exist, but independent testing revealed this hybrid monster was producing over 350 horsepower from a package that looked like a mild small block. The genius was in the combination. A 350 block bored 30 thousandths over, combined with a 400 crankshaft that increased the stroke from 3.48 inches to 3.75 inches. This created 383 cubic inches of displacement that delivered torque characteristics identical to big blocks while maintaining the weight and handling advantages of small block architecture. But here's where the underground engineering gets really sophisticated. The 383 wasn't just about displacement, it was about optimizing every component for maximum performance. The longer stroke increased leverage on the crankshaft, while the small block breathing characteristics allowed higher RPM operation than traditional big blocks. We're talking about an engine that could produce 400 pounds-feet of torque while revving to 6,000 RPM consistently. Meanwhile, the Ford 390 FE was being deliberately neutered by corporate mandate despite having specifications that could have dominated the entire muscle car market. The 390 featured a 4.05-inch bore and 3.78-inch stroke that created ideal displacement for both torque production and high RPM breathing. But Ford was shipping these engines with conservative camshafts and restrictive intake manifolds that hid their true potential. The real 390 specifications that Ford refused to publish were absolutely devastating. With proper camshaft timing and unrestricted breathing, these engines were capable of over 400 horsepower while maintaining the durability that made the FE family legendary in truck applications. The cast iron construction could handle power levels that would destroy aluminum engines, but Ford was keeping this information classified to protect their big block sales programs. But here's where the underground technical innovations get really sophisticated. 383 builders discovered that the longer stroke created rod angularity issues that could be solved with custom pistons featuring relocated pin heights. The cylinder heads required special attention to combustion chamber volume calculations, as the increased displacement changed the compression ratio dynamics significantly. Meanwhile, the 390's FE architecture featured wedge combustion chambers with canted valve angles that promoted superior flame propagation compared to conventional designs. The intake ports were sized perfectly for the displacement, creating velocity characteristics that maintained torque production across the entire RPM range. Ford engineers had also incorporated cross-bolted main bearing caps and thick deck construction that could support boost applications decades before turbocharging became mainstream, but this capability was never officially acknowledged or exploited in factory applications. Now we're getting into the real conspiracy, and what I'm about to reveal will expose the most sophisticated cover-up in automotive history. The 383 stroker existed because General Motors engineers were secretly supporting an underground network of hot rod shops that were building engines GM couldn't officially endorse without destroying their entire corporate liability strategy. Internal documents that have leaked over the decades reveal that GM was providing technical support and even prototype parts to selected speed shops, while maintaining official denial of any involvement. The corporation knew that hot rodders were creating combinations that exceeded anything they could legally sell, so they developed a shadow support network that allowed innovation to continue without corporate fingerprints. Ford's suppression of the 390 was even more calculated and sinister. Corporate executives had conducted market research proving that a properly developed 390 could outsell their entire big block lineup while costing significantly less to manufacture. But instead of capitalizing on this advantage, they made a strategic decision to hide the engine's capabilities to protect profit margins on their more expensive power plants. The insurance industry was being deliberately misled about both engines' true capabilities. The 383 flew completely under actuarial radar because it appeared to be a modified small block rather than a purpose-built performance engine. Meanwhile, Ford was providing conservative power ratings for the 390 that bore no relationship to its actual output when properly configured. But here's the smoking gun that proves how deep this conspiracy really went. Both engines were being developed with assistance from military contractors who were applying aerospace technology to civilian automotive applications. The metallurgy advances and engineering techniques being used were classified at government levels, but they were being secretly implemented in underground engine programs that existed outside normal regulatory oversight. The racetrack became the proving ground where these shadow engines demonstrated their true capabilities, and the results were so shocking that racing organizations had to implement new rules just to control their dominance. 383 stroker combinations were embarrassing official factory big blocks in drag racing while competing in small block classes where they had massive displacement advantages. Underground racing circuits that existed outside official sanction became the primary battlefield for these engines. Street racers discovered that 383-powered cars could run times that matched or exceeded big block competition while maintaining the handling characteristics that made them nearly unbeatable on twisty roads. The power-to-weight ratios were so superior that traditional big block cars couldn't compete in real-world conditions. Meanwhile, Ford 390 engines that had been properly developed were dominating in applications where their corporate masters never intended them to compete. Hot rod shops that understood the FE architecture were building engines that could run with the most exotic big blocks while maintaining durability that made them practical for daily driving. Professional engine builders who worked with both power plants described them as representing the absolute pinnacle of what was possible when corporate restrictions were removed. The 383 proved that intelligent engineering could overcome displacement disadvantages, while the 390 demonstrated that Ford had been sitting on technology that could have revolutionized the entire performance car market. But here's the most damning evidence of their true capabilities. Both engines were so successful in underground applications that manufacturers began implementing design restrictions specifically to prevent hot rodders from replicating these combinations. General Motors changed their parts numbering systems to make stroker builds more difficult, while Ford began using different bolt patterns and mounting configurations to discourage FE modifications. The collector car market has finally exposed the truth about these underground engines, and the recognition is driving values through the roof as enthusiasts realize they represent some of the most significant engineering advances in muscle car history. Original 383 stroker builds are now commanding premium prices that reflect their revolutionary impact on hot rodding culture. Restoration specialists who work on these engines report that the original underground builds were constructed to standards that exceeded most factory production. The machine work required to properly execute a 383 combination demanded precision that was only available at the most sophisticated speed shops, making authentic examples incredibly rare and valuable. Engine builders who specialize in FE development consistently report being amazed by the 390's potential for power increases with minimal modifications. These engines were so overbuilt from the factory that they could handle performance levels that wouldn't become common until decades later. The basic architecture was capable of supporting power outputs that Ford never dared to explore publicly. The historical significance of both engines is finally being recognized by automotive historians who understand that they represent turning points in the relationship between manufacturers and enthusiasts. The 383 proved that hot rodders could exceed factory capabilities through intelligent engineering, while the 390 demonstrated that manufacturers were deliberately suppressing their own technology. Modern automotive journalists now acknowledge these engines as representing some of the most important developments in American performance car history, even though they existed largely outside official recognition. The underground nature of their development makes them more significant than many official factory programs that received much more attention at the time. The 383 stroker versus 390 FE conspiracy is just the beginning of the underground automotive world that existed parallel to official factory programs. And if you think this story is shocking, wait until you see what other shadow developments I've uncovered. I found evidence of secret engine combinations, underground parts networks, and corporate cover-ups that make this look like amateur hour. Hit that subscribe button right now because next week I'm exposing the Pontiac underground program that was so secret it didn't officially exist even within General Motors. This investigation involves classified parts, shadow engineering teams, and performance combinations that were allegedly ordered destroyed when corporate executives discovered what was happening. The documentation I found will prove that the manufacturers were running parallel development programs they couldn't publicly acknowledge.